Hi, welcome to chapter 30, where we'll be going through White's alternatives in the main line of Catalan. So the starting point of this chapter is after d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, g3, bishop e7, bishop g2, castles, castles, dc, queen c2, b5. And instead of the line with a4, b4, and knight fd2, we'll be covering all of White's options after b5. The first line which we are going to have a look is at knight d5, which was not really popular but became a bit popular after Magnus used this against Nepo in their World Championship match. A4, the reason why people play A4 is after B4, White has, we have a weakness on C4, and then knight e5 is a very threatening move. But without weakening the c4 pawn, the move knight e5 doesn't look that great to me. We can play knight d5 and neutralize the bishop on g2. Now we have an extra pawn. And if White tries to undermine it with a4, now we play c6. And because White had played early knight e5, we had the time to push c6 and keep our queen side secured. We now have an extra pawn. So it just seems like a good position for black. If White plays knight c3, which is what all the top players have played in this position, we go f6 and kick the knight back. The reason we do this is so that our pawn on c4 is not really weak. And after knight f3, we play b4, gain space, and force the knight to make a decision. After knight e4, we go bishop a6, defending the pawn on c4. And now we have a very comfortable game. We want to play knight d7 next, bring in our last minor piece, and then strike in the center with e5 or preferably c5. And that gives us a very comfortable position. Coming back to 8th move, after a4, it also makes sense to ask why c6 isn't good. If we are able to preserve the pawn, what can be better than that? The problem is, after a b5, c into b5, White has knight g5, and we can't play knight d5 here due to queen into h7. But if White had played knight e5 here, now there is no knight g5 and we can comfortably play knight d5 and meet a4 with c6. Therefore, after a4, we play b4 and gain space. And now let's cover all of White's alternatives apart from knight fd2. Let's start by the main move, knight bd2. And the most challenging move in this position is knight e5, which we'll cover at the very end. Let's start by checking knight bd2. The move is very, very logical. White wants to play knight c4 and take on c4 with the knight occupying the outpost. However, this allows us to neutralize White's g2 bishop with bishop b7. By the way, the move b3 is quite interesting here, with the idea of meeting queen c4 with bishop a6 and after queen b3 playing knight c6. This is a very, very dynamic way to play this position, and I don't recommend it because of objective reasons, but practically you can definitely test it out. Instead, I recommend going bishop b7, neutralizing the bishop and looking to strike back in the center with c5. White takes back the pawn understandably, and we challenge the center with c5. Now there are two critical moves. There is rook d1 and there is d into c5. Let's start by checking rook d1, where White is threatening to play dc5 and then knight d6. What do we do in this case? Do we step out of the pin, or do we embrace the pin and continue with our plans? We play knight bd7 and get a fresh piece into the attack. As usual, what we are trying to do is to get our pieces out as quickly as we can and then put pressure on White's position. Now we are looking to play rook c8 and maybe cd4 at some point, looking to put pressure over the c file. White has again some choices here. There is bishop f4 and there is dc5. Let's start by checking dc5. This isn't great as it allows us to play bishop e4, and now the c2 queen is lacking good squares. If the queen goes to d2, we can play knight c5, and the weaknesses on the queen side are glaring. We are threatening to play knight b3, and White's c1 bishop and the rook on a1 are in trouble. Queen b3 doesn't work here as well because of knight c5 followed by knight into b3. Therefore, white needs to play bishop f4 here, threatening knight d6. White has also developed a fresh piece. Here we go bishop d5. We are centralizing our bishop and not allowing white to attack our bishop with a tempo after knight d6. White's main move therefore is knight fe5, trying to neutralize our bishop on d5. By the way, we were also threatening cd4 and rook c8, and that was the secondary plan of bishop d5. After knight fe5, we continue with the strategy of bringing all of our pieces into the game and play rook c8, getting the rook on the open file. We don't want to play bishop g2 as we are spending time on a capture, while after rook c8, if white takes on d5, that allows us to improve the position of a knight with knight d5. We want our opponent to capture so that we improve the position of our pieces, not them. After rook c8, the only challenging move is e4, gaining space and forcing us to make a decision with our bishop. We don't want to go back, as that would mean white would have a great passed pawn after d5, and so we play bishop into c4. Now white has again two choices, queen c4 and knight into d7. Let's start by checking out queen c4, where white recaptures the bishop, but that allows us to play knight e5. cd4 is fine too, but I found this to be easier. Now white needs to play bishop e5. d5 creates a set of passed pawns and shutdowns both the bishops, something which is not desirable for white. While after bishop e5, we can play cd4. And if white plays queen d4, we now get our queen into the action with queen a5, also putting pressure on the e5 bishop. We are threatening to play rook fd8 next, and maybe bishop c5, looking to improve the position of our bishop. The queen on d4 is slightly vulnerable, and so is the bishop on e5, while we keep more space on the queen side. The bishop on g2 is a bad bishop, and because of all of these reasons, black stands slightly better. Coming back to the 15th move in this line with knight into d7, here we go queen into d7. Knight d7 is not great here, as after queen c4, white now keeps an healthy advantage, let's say after cd queen d, because of the pair of bishops and more active pieces. We don't want to allow that, and we play queen d7, put our queen on a better square and keep the knight on an active square. If white plays queen c4 here, now we take on d4, and the point is after queen d4, we have queen d4, rook d4, and the very strong knight g4, putting pressure on the pawn on f2 and threatening bishop c5 or e5. Because of this, we keep the initiative and have a very comfortable position. If white plays tc5 on the 16th move, this is what white was threatening against queen d7. We play the very smart queen e8 with the idea of meeting queen c4 with bishop c5, and now we are threatening bishop f2, so the queen needs to step back, and it seems like white has a space advantage and the advantage of pair of bishops. Thus white is preparing to play e5, but now the point of queen e8 is revealed. We play e5 and shut down the pawn on e4. Now white has many weaknesses on the queen side and in the center, especially the square on d4. We want to play queen e6 next, improve the position of our queen, or play bd4. White has a bad bishop, while we have our knight is very well placed, and I don't see anything wrong with that. And if we are able to trade this f4 bishop, we'll have a situation with good bishop, bad bishop versus a good knight situation, and our pieces are more active as the rook is on already an open file, and we have some weaknesses to attack to. Black's position looks very, very comfortable. Coming back to the 11th move, that was it for 11th rook d1. White can also try playing dc5, forcing us to play bishop e4. We don't want to play bishop c5 as now rook d1 comes with a tempo. Therefore, we go bishop e4 and challenge white's queen. As usual, white has some choices with the queen, but the main two moves are queen d2 and queen d1. Queen b3 isn't great, as we'll have knight a6 and knight into c5 would come with a tempo. All of our minor pieces are in the center, looking very, very good, and white won't be able to play queen b4 because some discovery ideas, and the queen is already in the spot of bother. Therefore, white might try to play queen d2, the second main move. The main move is obviously queen d1. The idea of queen d2 is that white wants to keep the option of playing rook fd1 at some point and also keeping some pressure on the pawn on b4. We are not bothered though, and we bring a fresh piece into the attack with knight bd7. Now, if white plays queen b4, we just play knight c5 and the queen is misplaced. We want to play rook b8 and knight b3, and we have the typical compensation in form of piece activity for just one pawn, something which we are not bothered by at all. If white plays knight d6 here, which was played by Mikhailevsky, we go bishop d5, preserve our bishop. Now we want to play knight c5, while if white goes queen b4, we can play knight c5, but let's gain a tempo first and play a5. The queen has to move and then we take on c5. After queen c5, we play bishop d6, recapture the piece and win a tempo again. White probably would play queen d4, and now we again get a new piece into the game with rook b8. So we are getting pieces in the game at all times, and we are looking to hit white's weaknesses. The rook keeps an eye on the weak b2 pawn and threatens rook b4 at some point too. We may also play knight e4 and bishop c5 and start harassing white's queen, which is a bit awkwardly placed in the center. We have full compensation for the missing pawn, and I just don't see a problem with black's position. If white plays something like bishop d2 to stop the b4 rook, we just go knight e4 and threaten bishop c5, queen d3 and rook into b2, or winning the bishop pair with knight into d2. That brings us to 13th, knight f e5. This is the main move in the position, and this is what Daniel Dubov played as well. Here we take on g2, and after king g2, the king is slightly vulnerable here. We take back with the bishop. Now knight c6 is not a problem, which would have been a problem if the bishop would have been on e7, since we can comfortably play queen c7. White therefore has to play knight d7, exchanging of the bishop. Otherwise, we'll play either knight e5 or just queen c7, and white has issues with the pieces on the queen side and also some space in the center. If white plays knight d7, we take back with the knight. We don't take back with the queen, as that allows white to take and play bd2 and develop the last piece. Our pawn on b4 is a bit weak. We don't want to play a5 as the knight is directly targeting it. And if we don't do that, white can play a5 and put some pressure on the weak pawn on b4. Therefore, we take back with the knight. And the only way this makes sense for white is to play b3 and develop the last minor piece. Now this knight is more active than our knight on d7. Therefore, we are happy to trade it off with knight b6. White needs to play queen d8 first, as after knight b6, we can play queen b6 and then push a5. The knight is not targeting it anymore, while white has a weak pawn on b3. We also have some open files, which we may try to attack. So queen d8, we go rook fd8 and bring a rook into the game. And white's last trick is knight into b6, asking us to play bishop b6 so that they can play a5, stopping us from playing a5. And after bishop d4, play rook a4, put some pressure on the pawn on b4. White is threatening bishop d2, while bishop c3 runs into bishop e3, and white has some activity. Therefore, we go a b6, stop all of that, stop white from pushing a5, and keep the bishop on c5. It seems like our pawn structure is spoiled, but upon closer inspection, white is lacking a good move with the bishop, as bishop b2 runs into rook d2. Our activity of pieces fully compensate for the slightly poor pawn structure. If white plays something like bishop f4, we can just play f6, gain space with e5, force the bishop to go back, then go king f7, king e6, slowly gain space on the king side and just press around. It's not white who is pressing, it's black, as it's easier for us to improve the position thanks to the activity of our pieces, and we can slowly find some targets, squeeze in with space and push white to the back foot. Not saying this is much, but if anyone can win here, it's going to be black. Let's go back to move number 11, and instead of queen d2, white can also play queen d1. This time the bishop is not obstructed, so white won't have issues with the development of the bishop, but on the other hand, there is no rook fd1. Here, as usual, we play knight bd7 and get a piece into the action. White has two moves, knight fe5 and bishop e3. Knight fe5 is not effective here as there is no pressure on the pawn on b4, so we can take and play queen c7, getting rid out of these knight c6 ideas and looking to take back on c5 next. The king is also slightly vulnerable to these checks, and we stand slightly better thanks to the weaknesses on the queen side and somewhat poor positioning of the white king. We want to take on c5 next, then get all of our pieces into the game and put pressure on white's queen side. While the most played move is bishop e3, but after bishop c5, bishop into c5, knight c5, we have a very comfortable position. White, as usual, has weaknesses on the queen side, and we are looking to exploit it with queen d1, bishop c2, or if queen d8, rook f d8, followed by knight b3 and rook a c8. We keep very good chances. And that was it for the main sideline with knight bd2. We now move on to the other sidelines. Bishop g5 was tried by some grandmasters, but I don't really like it too much. We can defend our pawn with bishop a6, and if white tries to recapture it with knight bd2, we can start making threats with b3. Queen c3 is not good, as we have knight d5 attacking the queen and the bishop, while queen c1 is very passive. We can play knight c6, looking to occupy the outpost, and also developing our last minor piece. After knight c4, knight b4, we have huge threats on the queen side, and white is way too slow. We are looking to play knight c2 or to play c5, dc5, rook c8, where we'll be exerting pressure on the c file. Black is on the slightly better side of the equality, but from a practical viewpoint, it's just obvious that anyone would pick black here. Coming to move number 9, if white plays queen c4, taking back the pawn with queen, that allows us to win a few tempos with bishop a6, queen c2, knight bd7, threatening the typical c5, dc5, rook c8, and then putting pressure on the c file and on the light squares. The pawn on b4 covers the important c3 square, so white has issues with development on the queen side. Finally, we move on to the main sideline of this chapter, that is b4 and knight e5. This is something which was not popular, but I feel is the most critical move in this position, and is also being recommended by Grandmaster Alonso in his course on Catalan, which makes it important to study. White targets the pawn on c4 without allowing us to play knight d5, and since if we play knight d5 now, white has the vision of the bishop open, which was not the case in this variation. Here the bishop was obstructed. The drawback, however, is we can play queen into d4 and attack the knight. If we go knight d5, white had some knight d2 ideas. Also, the other drawback was that the knight could come into the game. But here we have queen d4, and the problem with white's setup was that the knight on e5 is hanging. White would probably take on e8, where we go queen into e5, and this is an important moment to discuss strategically. So we have two pawns for the exchange, which is a great material combination, but the pawn on c4 and c7 are doubled, and the c4 pawn is hanging. That is something which is against us. Then something in our favor is that these pawns are controlling a lot of squares, meaning that white doesn't have an easy way out to develop their pieces, that is in our favor. And the other thing which is in our favor is that we have ideas of queen h5 and knight g4, and we can launch immediate threats on the king side since there is no defender right now defending the king. And because of all of this, the position is strategically balanced. Now let's come to concrete moves. White has a lot of ideas here, but the main move is bishop f4, Let's start by checking out all the sidelines. Firstly, queen c4 is not good. We can get our bishop out with a tempo, and after queen c2, play c6, shut down the bishop. We are threatening bishop into e2, and also knight g4 and queen h5. Let's say that the attack is very deadly after that. Let's say white plays rook a2, just to demonstrate the point. We can play queen h5, white plays rook a1, and now we have knight g4, and the game is already over because h4 runs into bishop h4, and then there is no shield around the white king. And that's why queen c4 isn't great. While bishop g2 is also very slow, we can play bishop a6 and defend the weak pawn on c4, after which we keep extra space. If white plays something like bishop f4, we just play queen a5, and because of these pawns, we have a very good advantage. We may play knight d5 on the next move, or play b3 targeting the queen. So the main sideline apart from bishop f4 is bishop f3. This move not only defends the pawn on e2 but also covers the queen's route to h5. Here we still go for bishop a6 and defend our pawn on c4. We now want to push b3 and centralize our knight and improve it with knight d5. White has to play bishop f4 since knight d2 runs into b3 and the queen is in trouble. So bishop f4, we go queen a5. Now we have truckloads of space and we want to play knight d5 on the next move, challenging this bishop and also opening up the diagonal for our e7 bishop. We might also play b3 to force the queen to go back and gain more space. White's main move is knight bd2, pretty much the only one as well, where we go b3 and after this we have a great position. Knight c4 isn't great as after queen b4, we are winning the knight and so white is losing material, while queen c1 is very passive. Here we just go queen b4, defend the pawn, and we are happy to give up the c7 pawn as it opens up the c file. And more importantly, the pawn on c4 controls a lot of squares. So if we have to prioritize a pawn, we'll definitely prioritize the c4 one. If white goes bishop c7, we can now activate our pieces with knight d5, where we are threatening bishop f6 and also knight c6, knight d4, bringing in the last minor piece into the game and squeezing white with our activity. Bishop d5 doesn't help as after e d5, these pawns are way too strong and soon we'll have a passed pawn on the queen side with bishop f6, knight c6 and c3 or knight d4 at some point. In fact, black is already winning here. That brings us to the main move, that is 11th, bishop f4. White attacks our queen with a tempo and brings in a new piece. We don't defend our c7 pawn, but rather go for the kill with queen h5 and keep an eye on the weak h2 pawn. Now white has a few moves, but the crucial move is bishop f3. Queen c4 is not great as that allows us to unleash an attack on the king side with knight g4. If white plays h4, trying to defend against the threat of queen h2, we can attack with e5. We wanted to play bishop h4, but after gh4, queen h4, the h2 square is guarded, so we force the bishop to go back. If white plays queen c7, counter-attacking our bishop, we just play bishop d7, develop a piece and defend our bishop indirectly. After bishop d2, we play rook c8, force the queen to go to an inferior square. Bishop h4 was possible, but I want to get all of my pieces into the game as much as I can. And after queen a7, now we go bishop h4. gh4, queen h4 is already a decisive attack. A sample line can be king g2, but after queen h2, king f3, queen h3, king e4, the king's not running anywhere. We can just checkmate it in the center with rook c4. And after king d5, many ways to win, but the simplest is knight e3, bishop e3 or fe3, and queen e6 mate. The king is mated right into the center of the board. That brings us back to 14th, bishop d2. The bishop retreats, but we can still take on h4 and have a decisive attack. We are threatening bishop g3, while after gh4, queen h4, white can't stop the mate. If they try to do it with bishop f4, we take it and now bring in a fresh piece into the attack with rook d8. We stop knight d2 as well, as we have rook into d2, while we are threatening rook d6 and rook g6 with a decisive attack. And that was it for the 12th queen c4 line. Coming back to move number 12, if white goes bishop f3, we go knight g4 and attack the pawn on h2. White, as usual, has bishop g4 and the natural h4. This isn't great, as we can still play e5, and after the bishop goes back, we again take on h4. gh4, queen h4, and the king is busted. If white tries to take the knight, we take back with the queen, some checks, and get the bishop into the game. White can't avoid the mate either with queen g4 or f3, queen g3. Therefore, white will play bishop into g4 and we take back with the queen. Now the most played move in these positions is knight d2, but the strongest move is queen c4. Let's start with knight d2, which a lot of people play. So white is bringing in a fresh piece into the game, but this allows us to gain a couple of useful tempos and bring our pieces into the game with e5, sacrificing a pawn, firstly, so that after bishop e5, the queen guards the c4 pawn, and also we can play bishop a6, get our bishop into the game, and threatening to play knight c6, winning a tempo. So we'll be winning two tempos, as after bishop f4, we also have knight d4, attacking the queen and the e2 pawn. Don't forget that because of bishop into g4, white's light squares are very, very weak, and because of all of these reasons, black has an edge because of piece activity and more space in the center. Therefore, white needs to play queen c4, winning a pawn, where we go e5, looking to win some material. White can't move the bishop, so the only move that makes sense is queen into c7. f3 is logical, but it creates some weaknesses around the king. We can go queen d7, and now we are threatening bishop a6 and knight c6, getting our pieces into the action. White takes, but now we have bishop a6. So we still have one pawn for the exchange. So overall, the material deficit is just 1 point, but our pieces are way too strong and white's king is very, very weak. If the queen moves to d4, we go queen e6, threatening knight c6 or rook e8, and both the e5 pawn, e5 bishop and the pawn on e2 are weak. If white plays queen c7, we again go queen e6, threatening rook c8 and knight c6 or bishop c5. White is significantly behind in development and has too many weaknesses on the queen side and in the king side. Therefore, after e5, white needs to play queen c7, where we go e into f4. White takes, and here the material deficit is down to just 1 pawn. After fg3, that too, even after we take on g3. So if white takes on g3, the material is equal, but white has an extra exchange. So how does this make sense for us? Well, because white now has significant weaknesses, and we can win a couple of tempos with knight c6. We are threatening knight d4 and knight e2, and then white is busted on the light squares. If white goes queen h4, we take on e2, threatening queen b2, and the issue of lack of development arises again. We are threatening knight e5, bishop a6, or queen b2, and white is busted. While if white tries to defend the e3 pawn with queen e3, we have knight d4, threatening knight e2. The king can't move to the h file because of queen h5 check, and bishop b7 check, or we can play knight c2 and win some material. White cannot defend this position. If white tries to take back with the f pawn, we have queen d4 check, followed by queen into b2, and this position is also slightly better for black. Therefore, the move is knight d2, which is what Alonso recommends as well, and white basically gives up material to bring in more pieces into the game. White follows the principle of activity over material as well. and tries to bring in the last minor piece. Here the move which all of the authors and the engine recommend is G into F2, where after King F2, Queen D4, Queen E3, the position is slightly comfortable for white, as now the king is not really under attack since our pieces are not into the game, and white enjoys a small material advantage. However, the engine doesn't consider knight c6 at first, which I think is a very strong improvement here. Now, if white goes queen d6, now we can take on f2 as there is no queen e3. After king f2, we can play rook e8, bring in the rook into the game, and also threaten bishop a6. White can't take on c6 due to the threat of rook e2 mate, and black is already much better here thanks to the much safer king and piece activity, which means white needs to be precise as well. And so white's move is queen e4, which stops the rook from joining the attack and also brings the queen towards the king side. And here was the main point. We don't take on f2, but we take on h2, trying to open up the h file. G into h2 check. White's only move is king h1. King h2 is a blunder, as after queen h5 check. King g1, we have queen g5 check, and the knight on d2 falls. If queen g2, we take on d2, and after queen c6, we can take on b2, and we already have a much better position. The material is equal as we have bishop and 2 pawns for the exchange, but more significantly, we have a passed pawn, and white's king is very weak. Because of this, white needs to use the pawn as a shield and play king h1, but this means that we have recovered all of the material deficit. We can play queen d7, avoiding the queen exchange and looking to play bishop b7 and rook e8. And to be fair, you can stop memorizing at this point. It just looks like a very good practical position to play. The reason I have included the following few moves is because computer recommends it. And if somebody comes to know that you are following the course or you are playing this line, you need to be absolutely sure that, okay, this line works. I don't think it's practical for the first game, but from that moment onwards, this line becomes important as the computer says white has an advantage in this position. But if we go deeper, that's not the case. So the computer line is rook a d1, bringing the rook into the game, where we play rook e8 and bring our rook into the game as well. And I just feel this is, very natural and comfortable for a black player practically. But let me show you what computer says. Computer wants to play queen f4 so that there is no pin, where after rook e4, rook e2, we have won a pawn, but computer had the idea of knight e4, queen e7 and rook e1. The main point is it feels like after rook e1, knight e5, we have a very comfortable game. The bishop's coming in, there is all kinds of ideas. Knight d3 is in the air, but white has knight g5. Knight d6 is not an issue. We can play queen d6, queen e5, bishop b7 check, king h2, and we have a repetition with queen h6. We don't mind a repetition if it's 27 precise moves from our opponent in a very complicated game. Ultimately, chess is a draw, and if our opponent plays this precisely, sure, you deserve the draw, yeah? So, rook knight e5, the critical move which the computer says is knight g5. It feels weird as after f6, black just seems to be better, but there is this amazing queen c4 check, exploiting too many weaknesses. I don't think it's very practical, but computer shows an advantage of 0.6. But after knight c4, rook e7, fg5, the evaluation comes down. So after rook e8, king f7, rook c8, we can play knight b2. And a very simple way to understand this position is white wants to keep this passed pawn, but we have many pawns on the queen side. Our plan is to rush with our king onto the queen side, win this pawn, we'll lose all the queenside pawns, but then we'll try to promote this pawn. White will have to give the rook on c8 for the b pawn, and we'll give our knight for the f pawn, resulting in a draw. I have gone very deep in this endgame, and that was my summary of the ideas. So if white plays rook c7, we go king e7, king e6, rook a7, king d6, and already computer realizes it's a draw. So again, to sum it up, you will lose all of these pawns, but you'll win the pawn on a4. Then you'll push this pawn and use your king to advance that pawn and promote it. White will give up the rook. White will try to push the f pawn, for which you will give up your knight, and the position should be a draw. I don't think this line with queen c4 is very practical, but even if a super GM knows it, it shouldn't be an issue for you. And that was it for this chapter. Let me just try to summarize the chapter since it was a complicated one. Let's go back to move number 9, or rather move number 8 actually. If white goes knight e5 without a4, we can play knight d5, a4 and c6 and have a very comfortable game. We want to play f6 on the next move. If white goes a4, we go b4. The main move is knight b2, where we go bb7, knight c4 and c5. After dc5, we have bishop e4, an important intermezzo. For queen d2, we go knight d7, knight e5, takes and bishop c5. While for queen d1, we go knight bd7, and as usual, we play knight e5, bishop g2, takes, and queen c7 this time. A small difference since the pawn on b4 isn't hanging. There is also rook d1, where we go knight bd7, dc5 is not great, and for bishop f4, we go bd5, knight e5, and this time we don't take on g2 but play rook c8. e4, bishop c4, queen c4, knight e5, and for knight d7 we go queen d7, dc5, and the very important queen e8, with the idea of meeting queen c4 with bishop c5, queen e2 with e5. That was it for the knight bd2 line. If we go with knight e5, we go queen d4, exploiting that the e5 knight is hanging. And after bishop a8, we go queen e5. We want to play bishop a6 on the next move and preserve the pawn. So white plays bishop f4, where we go queen h5, threatening knight g4 and a mate. If queen c4, we have knight g4, h4 and e5. The bishop moves and we'll have bishop h4 with a decisive attack. And so white needs to play bishop f3, where we go knight g4. h4 is not good because of e5 and bishop h4. While bishop h4, bishop into g4, queen into g4, queen c4 runs into e5. White needs to take on c7, where we take back on f4, queen e7, f into g3. Now we are threatening knight c6 and knight d4. So white needs to play knight d2, where we play knight c6, queen e4, gh2 check, king h1, queen d7 with a great practical game. That was it for this chapter, and I'll see you in the next one.